My name is Olivia Matthews. I'm 34 years old and currently the CEO of the upscale restaurant chain Harvest and Hearth based in Denver. But to reach that position, I had to swallow an insult so sharp that even now, every time I think about it, my chest tightens like someone clawing straight through it. That day was my mother-in-law's retirement party. Linda Carter held at a luxurious hotel in Manhattan. I walked in wearing a black silk dress. The crystal lights cast golden reflections on the walls, making the space feel like a royal dream. But the chill didn't come from the air, it was in the eyes of those seated around the head table. The table was full. There was no chair for me. Linda took a sip of red wine and looked at me with eyes sharp as knives. We thought, maybe you should sit with the kitchen staff. They're the ones who actually belong here. 3 days later, I sat in a very different seat, not beside her family, but in the studio of a national TV network. In my hand was the acquisition contract for the entire Carter Foods Corporation. Have you ever been treated like an outsider in your own family? Are you strong enough to turn humiliation into a platform for your rise? If you've ever felt that way, leave a comment below. Hit like and subscribe to this channel to join me in uncovering the shadows behind the spotlight and the empty, rehearsed blessings. My journey didn't begin at that dinner table. It started long before, when I first stepped into a family that never truly welcomed me. I met Ethan Carter at a national culinary symposium in Chicago, where chefs, investors, and industry experts gathered to share emerging trends, sustainable innovations, and resilient food systems. I was invited to speak about the journey behind Harvest and Hearth, an upscale restaurant chain inspired by indigenous farm-to-table cuisine, where each dish could be traced to its source: who grew it, what land nurtured it. As I stepped off the stage, Ethan was already standing at the end of the aisle, his gray suit smooth without a crease, hair neatly slicked back, and a smile that suggested he'd never known failure. "So you're the one who made organic carrots the most in-demand appetizer in Denver?" I looked at him, no raised eyebrows, no smile. "I think the credit goes to the farmers who grew them." He laughed. Best answer I've ever heard at a food conference. We had dinner together that same night. I ordered grilled fish with roasted vegetables, my usual. Ethan chose a rare steak, which didn't surprise me. But the way he brushed aside the peppercorns, carefully trimmed the fat off the meat, and dipped it into the sauce before tasting and nodding, that caught my attention. Ethan Carter wasn't just the son of a food industry mogul. He understood palate and consumer habits, and he noticed the smallest details even when sitting across from someone like me. We kept in touch after the event. At first, a thank you message, then a request for feedback on his company's plan to expand into organic food processing. Then came longer phone calls, becoming more personal. "Do you visit the farms where you source your produce?" "I live there 1 week a month." "Then I'll have to quit my job just to keep up with you." I chuckled. "You wouldn't last 2 days without air conditioning and Italian espresso." I didn't realize when exactly Ethan's cocky charm became something I looked forward to each night. There was something in the way he bantered, confident but not condescending, that made me wary, yet curious to trust. 3 months later, he flew to Denver. No notice. He stood outside my flagship restaurant, arms crossed, looking up at the oak-engraved Harvest and Hearth sign in the freezing air. "Do you have time for a coffee?" I crossed my arms and looked at him from the doorway. "I don't serve Italian espresso." "Then give me whatever's the warmest thing you've got." I invited him into the kitchen, where a pot of Earl Grey tea was gently steaming. I poured it into 2 ceramic mugs and set them on the long wooden table at the center of the open kitchen. No chandeliers, no white tablecloths, but his eyes stayed on me like I was the center of that room. "Olivia," he said, "I know this may be sudden, but I'd like to invite you to dinner with my parents this Saturday." I paused. "Why?" "Because I've mentioned you quite a bit. And my mother is starting to think you're a PR invention." I didn't respond right away. My eyes drifted to the tiny scar on my right index finger, a reminder of slicing onions with a razor-sharp knife when I opened my first restaurant. I never imagined I'd need to point to that scar just to prove I was real, to a rich mother. Finally, I said, "Fine. But I'm not performing. Ethan smiled. I don't need you to perform. I just need you to be yourself. That Saturday evening, I arrived at the Carter family mansion on the Upper West Side. A black iron gate opened to a manicured garden, the lights glowing soft and golden like a painting. But inside, the warmth vanished. Linda Carter stood at the head of the table, silver blonde hair neatly pinned, a pearl necklace that screamed declaration. She didn't smile, didn't extend her hand, just nodded and said in a voice colder than steel, "So, you're Olivia Matthews?" "Yes, ma'am." "I heard you used to wash dishes in restaurants as a student?" I stayed composed. "Yes, it taught me how a kitchen runs from the inside out." She stared at me for a long moment. "I always thought Ethan would choose someone with a higher degree. Still, working your way up does count for something." I heard the word "still" as a precision cut aimed squarely at my pride. Throughout the meal, she kept asking questions about my background, my family, my company's income, whether I planned to expand to New York, and if I'd ever been cited by a health inspector, each one carefully framed, never rude, but sharp enough to dissect. Ethan remained quiet, occasionally squeezing my hand under the table. But I didn't need protection. I wasn't there for approval. I was there to understand the terrain I'd stepped onto. As I left, Linda walked me to the door, her eyes drifting back to the perfectly trimmed garden outside. "You have drive, but intelligence? I'm not so sure." I stood still, then said, "I hope I'll have a chance to prove I have both." "We'll see." The door shut behind me without a single farewell, but I wasn't angry. I felt energized. I had never walked away from a space that denied me without coming back stronger. This would be no different. We got married the following spring at a historic seaside villa in Newport, where seagulls soared over the bright blue sky and ocean waves echoed like an impromptu symphony. But what should have been a poetic setting, I realized on the very day I was welcomed as a Carter that I had no voice. Linda picked the venue even though I'd suggested a small vineyard in Colorado, the place where Ethan once promised to re-propose on our 5th anniversary. "I think the ocean's more elegant. Vineyards feel provincial." She said it during a wedding planning meeting, one I should have led. When I tried to give input on the menu, Linda cut me off. "Olivia, sweetie, you should rest a bit. Let me and the assistants handle the organizing. After all, this is the only time I'll marry off my son." I smiled, swallowing the lump in my throat. I didn't say that I'd organized nearly 300 weddings before including some for clients on the Forbes list. Every time I brought up including harvest and hearth dishes in the menu, Linda objected. "I've already booked a restaurant from Manhattan. The chef was nominated for a James Beard. You should. Spend your time choosing a dress that flatters your figure." And I knew Ethan didn't want a confrontation. When I quietly told him I felt pushed aside from my own wedding, he hugged me from behind and whispered, "I know my mom can be a little overpowering, but she means well. Don't let the little stuff ruin the mood. We're getting married, Olivia." I nodded, not arguing. Maybe I was too tired to push back. Maybe I hoped everything would change once that ring slipped onto my finger. But it didn't. We moved into the penthouse Linda and John gave us as a wedding gift, a luxurious glass apartment overlooking Central Park. Each morning, I'd pull back the curtains to a view so beautiful it took my breath away. But inside me, the suffocation crept in like slow-burning smoke. Linda visited unannounced, bringing gifts for the daughter-in-law that felt more like proclamations, silk nightgowns, French housekeeping books. Once, she pulled a bag of quinoa from our pantry and shook her head. "You should eat more protein. This organic stuff is fine for manual laborers, not someone in your new role." I smiled, cool but sharp. Guess I haven't adjusted to being a porcelain doll just yet. She didn't reply, only raised an eyebrow, then turned to Ethan as he entered the room. "Have you talked to Olivia about children yet? I want to hold a grandchild before I'm 70. Ethan avoided the question. But later that evening, over dinner, he put down his fork and said, point blank, "Mom's right. We should think about the future. And maybe you should hold off on expanding your locations. People are starting to talk, saying you're not making time for family." I looked up. Who exactly is talking? He sighed. It doesn't matter. But you need to understand. Career can't be everything. You need to know what matters most. I let go of the spoon, and it landed gently in the soup bowl. A small sound, yet in my head, it echoed like a slap across the face. I didn't argue. I didn't get angry. I just remembered. From that day forward, I stopped telling Ethan about meetings with investors, about plans to open a new branch in Austin, or about being invited to judge the national culinary competition. I still went, still worked, still signed contracts and opened 3 more branches within 10 months. But I didn't tell him. I used my own private investment fund, carefully separated assets that predated the marriage. I hired an additional legal advisor to ensure everything belonged to me alone. During the day, I wore the silk dress Linda had given me, accompanied Ethan to charity galas, smiled for the cameras. I knew how to use the flashbulbs to hide the cracks forming under the mask of marriage. At night, when Ethan was asleep, I worked from the living room. The light from my laptop cast a faint glow on my increasingly hollow face like a candle burning stubbornly in a storm. I didn't tell anyone. I once cried alone in the restaurant's walk-in freezer, when one of the chefs quit without notice. I didn't say that I had personally gone to buy meat to replace a last-minute canceled order. I didn't share that when Linda went on television saying, "The Carter family has always supported women." I clenched my fists so tightly my nails left marks on my palms. I was still myself. But no longer Olivia, wife of Ethan Carter. I was Olivia Matthews, the woman behind 6 profitable restaurants, 13 head chefs, and nearly 300 employees. The woman they thought they could control, mold into the perfect daughter-in-law for glittering holiday photo spreads. I knew I needed patience. Because if a party could mark the beginning of a marriage, then a single transfer could signal the end of an empire. And I had started preparing the moment I was excluded from the seat at the head table. Linda announced her retirement at an intimate gathering at the family's riverside estate. Holding a glass of red wine, she looked directly at Ethan as she declared that he would take over the Carter Foundation and most of the profitable real estate investment assets. The room broke into applause, and I, still seated beside my husband, smiled faintly, an instinct well practiced after years of breathing, the stifling air of internal family briefings. I had designed the menu for that evening, though no one had formally asked. Linda simply called over an assistant and said, "Get Olivia the sample menu she suggested the other day. Adjust it for Mr. Whitmore's preferences, remove the fish Melissa has allergies, and keep the rest." I nodded, asking no questions. Linda had never once thanked me directly, but I had gotten used to that. I no longer sought acknowledgement from her. What mattered to me was who held the real power behind the curtain, and in that game, I had prepared long enough to know when to stay silent and when to make my move. 3 weeks later, the formal gala was held at a 5-star hotel in Manhattan, one of my long-standing clients. I was the one who had suggested the venue, crafted the Art Deco-inspired decor concept, selected the vintage lighting, and personally revised the list of wine vendors. I didn't need my name on it because the event was officially hosted by the Carter Foundation. But everyone in the industry knew that Olivia Matthews was the woman behind the sparkle. And that alone gave me a place in the picture. That night, I arrived on time. Ethan had left the apartment earlier, saying he had to assist his mother with final guest list checks. I stepped out of the car, navy velvet gown fitted just right, my hair pinned up with the silver clip Ethan had given me on our first wedding anniversary. I didn't need to be flashy. I just wanted to keep a composed appearance. I thought, at the very least, on this day, I was still his wife, and like everyone else, I expected to be welcomed as a member of the family. But as I walked into the grand lobby, whispers began to ripple like gentle waves. One of the event managers approached and gently stopped me. "I'm sorry, Miss Matthews. There's been a small mistake. Your name isn't listed in the seating chart for the head table." I frowned. "I'm Ethan Carter's wife." "I understand, ma'am," she replied softly, "but the head table is fully booked at the family's specific request." I paused. Beyond the banquet hall doors, I could hear the clinking of glasses, soft music, polite laughter. I stayed composed. May I see the seating chart? She handed me a color-printed framed layout. The central table seated 12. Ethan sat to Linda's right. The remaining seats were for family members, his sister, her husband, aunts, uncles, veteran investors, and one guest named Veronica Hughes. I stared at the name like a pin piercing my chest. Veronica, Ethan's old flame. The one I had heard had returned to New York a few months ago and appeared with Linda at a charity event. I looked up and calmly asked, "Is Veronica Hughes attending with Ethan?" "Yes. We were informed she's the new community affairs representative for the Carter Foundation." I nodded, folded the chart, and returned it to her. "Thank you. Please seat me in the general area, near the windows." I entered the ballroom as if nothing had happened. A few glances flicked toward me, then quickly moved on as if I were misplaced decor. Linda rose the moment I appeared, wine glass in hand. She walked toward me, lips curved in a perfect smile but void of warmth. "Olivia, you came. I thought you might not." I held a composed smile. "It's your retirement party after all." She nodded. "Either way, I hope you understand. Tonight is for family. All seats are taken. Please don't trouble the staff." I looked at her for a moment, voice steady. "You mean, I'm not part of the family?" Linda didn't blink. "You're an outsider. Don't disrupt our evening." A hush spread like static. People overheard. But no one intervened. No one stood up for me. I felt Ethan's gaze from across the table. He didn't rise, didn't look directly at me, just held his glass, silent. I took a deep breath. I understand. I turned away before anyone could see my eyes welling up. No one knew that beneath that velvet dress was a prepared transfer contract. No one knew I had already purchased 3 shell companies tied to the Carter Foundation through private investors. No one knew this silent moment was the opening move on a new chessboard. I exited the ballroom quietly. The velvet pressed tight against my chest, not from fit but from shame wound tight like a noose. In that vast banquet hall, not a single soul called me back. Ethan still sat there, sipping the wine I had once picked for him on our first date anniversary. I stepped into the elevator. My heels echoed louder than usual on the marble floor. Just as the doors were about to close, the hotel manager rushed over. "Miss Matthews," he called softly, almost apologetically. "Sorry to bother you, but we haven't received final payment confirmation for the gala. Since the event was registered under your name, the system defaulted to notify you first." I turned, expression unchanged. "I thought the Carter Foundation was covering the expenses." He hesitated. "Publicly, yes, but all contracts are in the name of Harvest Events. That's one of your companies, correct?" I nodded. "I'll take care of it." I kept walking. No tears, no complaints. Just silence cloaking me like newly polished armor after years of dents. Because I had just spotted the first crack in the Carter Fortress. And I would begin exactly where they thought I was weakest, the fine print in their contracts. That night, I didn't go back to the penthouse. I went to my private office on the 17th floor of an old building in Tribeca, my quiet space for off-the-record meetings, separate from Harvest and Hearth. I turned on the light, slipped off my shoes, and sat in front of my screen. For 7 years as a Carter daughter-in-law, Linda always said I was the most pragmatic woman she'd ever met. She had me sign countless contracts because Olivia handles paperwork faster than my worn-out secretaries. I used to think that was trust. Later, I realized it was strategy. They used my name as a shield. Close enough to control, distant enough to blame if things fell apart. I opened each digital folder in the archive. Every real estate project, every charitable operation contract, every interim investment through shell companies bore my signature. I called my legal advisor, Courtney. She lived in Miami but was always on call when I needed her. "Court," I said when she answered, "I need a full audit of every subsidiary I signed on behalf of Linda in the past 5 years. Include any linked to the Carter Foundation." Prioritize ones labeled Temporary Operation Authorization. What's the goal? To determine my actual level of control over those assets. She paused. Are you suspicious? I stared at my laptop. Not suspicious. Confirming. That night, Courtney, my legal team, and I combed through every file. By the time dawn broke outside the glass windows, we discovered the number that made everyone stop typing. I was either directly or indirectly in control of the financial authority and signing rights over more than 40% of the Carter Foundation's active assets and several entities under Carter Real Estate Holdings. They used me as a legal intermediary to avoid taxes, to dodge investigations, to simplify HR paperwork. But what they didn't expect was that I had kept copies of every authorization, every appendix they assumed I hadn't read carefully. While the legal team was working, I quietly checked Ethan's phone. He was in the shower, and I only meant to look at his calendar. But one unread message from an unknown number made my hand freeze. Are you coming to the party? Linda made sure there's a seat for you next to him. I saved the number and searched the contacts. Veronica Hughes. I didn't need to dig into my memory. That name was still in one of my apps, the one where I'd noted Ethan's past relationships back when we first started dating. Veronica, his ex from college. The one who had shown up at the Carter family Christmas party before I was ever formally invited. I opened the message history. The texts were filled with insinuations. Plans like keep things quiet until Olivia settles down and divide assets smoothly. In one message, Veronica asked bluntly, if she finds out being excluded from the dinner was just step one to push her out, are you sure she won't strike back? Ethan had replied, she'll stay silent like always. Olivia's not the type to make trouble. I smiled. Not with sadness, not even with anger. Just clarity. A clarity so sharp it hurt. I forwarded all the messages to Courtney. She replied within 3 minutes. I'll start preparing a counter-divorce filing and a temporary asset protection order. But Olivia, what do you plan to do next? I looked down at my hands. The same hands once burned by hot oil, once shaking from the cold while hauling vegetables that first winter. Now they were steadier, more decisive. I'm not going to tear their castle down, I replied. I'm going to buy back every brick. I met Hunter Blackwell on a chilly morning in early October, in his private office on the 35th floor of Union Tower. The room had floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking Central Park, but Hunter never wasted time on the view. He was the kind of man who lived and breathed numbers and balance sheets, and if you couldn't bring him a razor-sharp argument, he'd dismiss you with a single frown. I had watched him from afar during Carter board meetings, always in the back, not saying much, but whenever he leaned in to whisper to Linda or Ethan, the entire room went silent. Because he wasn't just a longtime financial advisor, he was the man who had built this empire hand in hand with John Carter since the 1980 seconds. I'm surprised you reached out, Hunter said as I walked in, his tone flat like a row of cold figures. I thought you preferred kitchens over boardrooms. I didn't smile. I placed the briefcase on the table, opened the lock, and neatly laid out a thick stack of documents. No small talk. I needed him to see the truth. I think you should look at what Ethan and Linda have been hiding. He scanned the pages. Internal financial reports, cash flow statements, cross-guaranteed loan documents between subsidiaries, and a long list of assets already mortgaged. He read in silence for nearly 15 minutes. When he finally looked up, his eyes had darkened to chill. I'd never seen from such a polished advisor. Where did you get this information? From their own accounting system. I'm authorized to sign many contracts. I have access. He tapped a finger lightly on the desk. I warned Linda that using someone else's name to legitimize money flow was a double-edged sword. I sat upright, holding his gaze. I'm not trying to prove who's wrong. I just want to set things right. He remained silent for a long moment, then gently set his pen down. They won't be able to sustain their finances past next quarter. If they don't liquidate some major assets, Carter Group will run out of cash. I nodded. And if you back me, I have an alternative. What are you proposing? I've approached Aurora Capital. Hunter raised an eyebrow. Linda flatly rejected working with them. You want them back? Not just back. I want Aurora Capital as a potential buyer, but not for an immediate takeover. I need a softer path. I want you to remain neutral. Temporarily. He squinted. What are you negotiating? I'll give them access to the parent company's operational data for 3 months, in exchange for their help convincing small shareholders who collectively hold 18% to assign their proxy rights. He slowly nodded. A quiet takeover. No bloodshed, but enough to shake the ground. I knew Hunter didn't bend to sentiment. He didn't move for emotions, but he knew how to think long-term. And more than anyone, he understood that the Carter empire was rotting from the inside. He exhaled slowly. If Linda finds out I'm talking to Aurora, she'll see me as a traitor. I don't need you to talk. I need you to stand still. Just don't get in the way. He sat still a moment longer, then reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope, laying it on the desk. I've had my resignation letter prepared since last month, but I haven't submitted it. I looked at him. Why not? Because I still want to see who's strong enough to fix what John Carter built. I left Hunter's office just as the sunlight began to soften. In my hands was the first domino. I had earned the silence of the only man whose quiet could strip Linda of her final shield. 3 days later, I flew to San Francisco. On a private meeting floor at Aurora Capital's headquarters, I met Natalie Huang, the head of investment strategy. She wore an olive suit, hair in a neat bun, voice sharp but not cold. I laid everything out: asset maps, weak cash flow, the potential of reducing 35% in operational costs by restructuring the entire subsidiary ecosystem. I wasn't begging them to buy. I gave them a vision, one that, if they didn't step in, someone else surely would. After 2 hours of discussion, Natalie stood and shook my hand. I didn't think I'd be signing with the same woman Linda Carter once humiliated at her dinner party. Neither did I think I'd be the one putting the Carter empire on the negotiating table. What do you need from us right now? Silence. And a non-binding letter of investment interest, just enough to present to the board. And what will you do? I'll start meeting with the small shareholders, the ones tired of being treated like shadows in the Carter family drama. I flew back to New York the next day. For the next 2 weeks, I met 8 shareholders holding between 1% to 3% each. Some were early supporters of John Carter. Others were independent investors ignored by Linda at annual meetings. I didn't lure them with promises. I showed them the numbers: declining profits, damaged reputation, outdated strategies. And I showed them my plan, how I could turn a sinking ship into a lean, tech-forward, efficient ecosystem. Gradually, they nodded. Not because I was Ethan's wife, but because I was Olivia Matthews, the only one in that family with an actual plan. I sat in the dim studio of a small Brooklyn production house, the only light coming from the screen displaying the final cut of a 30-minute investigative feature. The content producer, a veteran journalist known for exposing financial manipulations in the nonprofit sector, slowed down the middle segment and glanced at me through narrow glasses. You're sure you want to remain anonymous as the source? I nodded. I don't need credit. I just need the truth told right. The feature opened with raw footage Linda Carter at a major fundraising event, passionately speaking about supporting immigrant communities. Then came screenshots of internal financial reports, compared with public filings, mismatched numbers, marketing partnerships, funneling hundreds of thousands to PR firms owned by her inner circle. Next were excerpts from a leaked email chain, in which Ethan and a shadow fund director discussed ways to build humanitarian optics to sway shareholder votes. Veronica was the one who signed off the documentation. I didn't need to say who handed over the data or answer any backstage questions. The trail was clear, and I had ensured none of it led back to me, at least. Not until the scandal was too big to cover up. The feature aired Monday morning during the prime slot of a widely trusted political news program. Within minutes, keywords like Carter Foundation scandal, charity image manipulation, insider shareholder revolt climbed trending lists. I didn't turn on the sound. I just watched Linda's face under those event lights, then the footage of doctored donation contracts. There was no denying, no room left for excuses. An hour after the segment ended, I got a call from an old board member. "Olivia, I hate to admit it, but it seems you did what no one else dared." "I didn't do anything," I said softly. "I just stopped staying silent." 4 board members resigned that same day, citing that they could no longer align with the current direction. Editorials began surfacing, discussing how an organization once praised as a model of transparency could reveal such grave structural flaws. I knew Linda wouldn't sit quietly. And just as expected, by that afternoon, she appeared on a live interview program. Her face was carefully made up, but the usual arrogance in her eyes had faded. "We are victims of a deliberate attack," she said. "A coordinated campaign aimed at discrediting my family." The host didn't miss a beat. "And who do you believe is behind this campaign?" She paused. "Possibly someone who feels unacknowledged within our ranks." I turned off the TV. The next morning, the press published an analysis from an independent investigative group. It revealed that Linda had used the charity's name to funnel money into opaque investment accounts. No board members were informed. No financial disclosures had been issued. One of the charity's largest former donors, Rawlings Corporation, announced they were pulling funding entirely. In a brief statement, they made their position clear. "We do not sponsor PR campaigns disguised as charity." I received a message from Natalie, the Aurora Capital representative. The dominoes have started to fall. The following 3 days were a media storm. Edited clips from the exposé spread like wildfire across social media. Comments flooded in. The perfect family was just a facade. The daughter-in-law they kicked out of the dining room now runs the show. Who is Olivia Matthews? And why hasn't she said a word? I remained silent. No interviews, no statements, no posts. Ethan called me that night. His voice was hoarse, half angry, half desperate. "What did you do? Do you know how devastated my mother is right now?" I replied calmly. "I just exposed the truth. Everything else? They built that on their own. What are you planning to do next?" "That's up to you. If you want this to end quietly, stay out of the way. But if you want to take it public, I'm ready." He said nothing, then hung up. The next day, Carter Holdings' internal stock value dropped nearly 8%. Even though the company wasn't publicly traded, internal investors began to pull out. Hunter sent me a short report. 2 out of 3 strategic partners are reviewing their current contracts. I printed out the latest shareholder structure map. In the bottom right corner, my name appeared as a note, designated proxy for 18%. With my indirect holdings and the independent shareholders who had sided with me, I now controlled nearly half of the voting power within the organization. No need to shout, no need to threaten. Just wait for the right moment. And the seat they once refused to give me was starting to come loose from the marble floor where they used to sit so comfortably and judge. The emergency meeting was held in the largest boardroom on the 40th floor of Carter Holdings headquarters. The oval-shaped table, nearly 25 feet long, was one I knew all too well. I had once sat at the far end, in the shadows, where no one sought my opinion on strategic matters. Today, I didn't sit there anymore. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his face tense from sleepless nights. Beside him was Veronica, wearing a beige suit with her hair tied up, one hand resting lightly on a folder like she was his personal legal advisor. Across from them, Linda sat with her back perfectly straight. Her navy dress made her look more like a politician than a philanthropist under fire. I entered the room at exactly 9 o'clock. Not early, not late. With me was my attorney, Mr. Walter Fields, who had represented more than a few Manhattan executives in discreet but powerful power transitions. Behind us were 2 minority shareholders, Mr. Whitmore and Miss Jenna Lee, whom Linda had ignored for over a decade while they supported Carter Holdings. They were silent no longer, and today, they stood with me. Ethan spoke as soon as I sat down. "This meeting has been called to address the ongoing internal instability within the executive board. With the consensus of a majority of board members, we propose the suspension of Olivia Matthews' coordinating privileges until the recent media allegations can be clarified. I didn't flinch. I reached into my leather bag, pulled out a file, and placed it neatly on the table. Walter leaned forward and slid a copy of the contract toward Ethan. "Before you continue," I said, not loud, but clearly, "I believe you should review the documents delivered to the board this morning." Linda gave Ethan a nod. He opened the file, flipped through a few pages, then stopped abruptly. The room fell into a vacuum of silence. Walter spoke. "The document before you is the formal notice from intermediary firms that now collectively hold more than 51% of Carter Holdings shares. Temporary coordinating authority has been assigned to Miss Olivia Matthews. All transactions are fully legal, completed over the past 6 months, and in compliance with centralized ownership regulations." Ethan looked up. "That's impossible. This doesn't make sense. You don't have the capital to pull that off." I met his gaze. "Because you never asked what I was doing. You assumed I was too busy rinsing vegetables, tasting soup, signing kitchen staff contracts. But I know how to read a financial statement. And I know how to exploit every loophole in that outdated governance structure your mother imposed." Veronica cut in, voice trembling slightly. "This kind of silent acquisition is manipulation. We could sue." Walter chuckled softly. "You might want to review Delaware's laws on indirect ownership through independent entities. There's no clause in the company charter forbidding share transfers via legal third parties." Linda, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Olivia, what do you think you'll gain by dragging this family to the brink?" I twisted the silver ring on my finger, eyes calm. "I'm not dragging anyone. I'm simply reclaiming what was mine." "That cliff? You built it yourselves." She narrowed her eyes. "You don't have the experience to run a company like Carter Holdings." "Maybe, but I have the vision, and I don't need everyone in this room to believe in me. I only need enough votes, and right now, I have them." I stood, not loudly, not dramatically, just firmly, like stating an undeniable truth. From this point forward, all strategic decisions, restructuring, senior leadership, investor partnerships must be approved by me or someone I appoint. This isn't revenge. This is a necessary shift in power. A few people at the table started flipping through their documents again. The tension was thick. Linda gripped the armrest. Ethan's breathing grew heavy, his fingers digging into his pale skin. Mr. Whitmore spoke gently but firmly. "I think we owe some respect to the only person in this room who didn't just talk about innovation, she actually did it." I nodded, then turned to the board. "I'm not asking you to pick sides. I'm asking you to do what's right." No one objected. No one stood up to leave. The meeting adjourned 15 minutes later. There were no applause, no friendly handshakes. But as I walked out of that room, I knew, for the first time, no one looked at me as Ethan's wife or the one handling logistics. They saw someone who held real power. And they knew I wasn't letting go. 3 days after that pivotal meeting, Ethan showed up at my office door. No call ahead, no bodyguard, no assistant, no protective entourage. Just him in a white dress shirt slightly wrinkled at the sleeves, collar undone, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. I didn't invite him in. But he stepped forward anyway, like some old instinct still made him believe I hadn't changed. "I just need 5 minutes," he said, his voice raspy like wind rustling through dry trees. I didn't respond. I sat at my desk, flipping through paperwork as if nothing unusual was happening. Not out of coldness, but because I needed to remember that the man standing in front of me had once read aloud a divorce draft written by his mother, planning to erase me from his life as cleanly as possible. "What are you here for?" I asked, eyes still down. Ethan swallowed hard. "To apologize." I looked up. "For cheating, for falsifying documents, or for trying to strip me of my legal rights during that board meeting?" He said nothing. I didn't wait for an answer. "I was wrong," he said at last. "I listened to my mother. I thought, you'd never be able to stand against this whole family. I tilted my head slightly. That's unfortunate. I didn't have to stand against anyone. I just had to step aside and let it all collapse on its own. Ethan stepped closer, standing at the edge of the desk. Linda's falling apart. She hasn't eaten in 2 days. The press is everywhere. Veronica filed a personal lawsuit. She says I misled her about my marital status, finances, and even our future. She's hired attorneys from Wallace and Grant. I straightened up. That's not my concern. He shook his head. You don't understand. They want to pull you into the case as a witness. Could you help me explain? I set my pen down. Do you remember the night I was excluded from your mother's dinner party guest list? He nodded. I remember clearly. You were sitting between your mother and Veronica. I stood in the foyer empty-handed, no seat, no name, no one cared. And you didn't come out. You didn't call me back. You let me walk away like I was disposable. Ethan looked down. For the first time, I saw him. Stop trying to cover up his weakness. What do you want? He asked. I can transfer the old shares back. We can split the assets under a new agreement. I'll sign anything if you ask. I exhaled softly, my voice lower. I don't want money. I want you and your mother to stop interfering with the management of any Carter Holdings divisions. You plan to take everything? No. I'm only reclaiming what should have been protected all along. The funds that actually support charity, the staff who've been loyal for decades, and the dignity of those your mother pushed out just because they didn't fit her so-called family class. He said nothing more. Just nodded quietly and turned away. Right before he reached the door, he looked back once. Did you ever love me, Olivia? I didn't hesitate. Very much. But you loved your mother more than me. And your mother loved your image more than she ever loved you. The only thing I didn't do was love myself soon enough. The door closed behind him, quiet as the final note of a forgotten song. Meanwhile, Linda Carter didn't stay silent. She appeared in an exclusive interview on a private news channel, one where most of the anchors were her longtime friends from elite clubs. Her face was still sharp, her dress still Chanel, but her voice no longer carried that icy confidence. Olivia Matthews is an ambitious woman. She didn't join our family to build, it was always about taking over. The host was silent for a moment, then asked, So, do you believe the financial evidence she released was false? Linda hesitated. I didn't say that. I just think there were other ways she could have chosen. That statement was immediately clipped and spread all over social media. Thousands of comments flooded Linda's old posts, criticizing her for trying to destroy someone who had once been her daughter-in-law and for using power to manipulate public trust for years. 3 days later, the court announced a preliminary investigation into the Carter Foundation for potential tax violations and misuse of funds. While Linda's legal team scrambled to contain the fallout, a federal health agency canceled a partnership deal worth over $20 million. I received a copy of the termination letter from our main partner, with a handwritten note. We believe Olivia will know how to do the right thing. Several major investors began publicly calling for a restructuring of the executive board. On financial forums, detailed breakdowns of my silent takeover strategy started trending, with titles like, From Kitchen to Boardroom, the Olivia Matthews Story. As for me, I still showed up to the office every day, still signed invoices for fresh produce for my restaurant chain, still held meetings with nonprofit partners about the scholarship program for Latina women. I didn't give interviews. I didn't go on TV. I didn't explain anything further. I just did my work and let Linda and Ethan answer for what they'd sown. I don't remember exactly when my own resurrection began. Maybe it was when I walked out of that boardroom, under eyes that were no longer full of contempt. Maybe it was when I signed the restructuring agreement for Harvest and Hearth, transforming it from a high-end Denver restaurant chain into a global brand built on the philosophy that food is connection, not class. I started with the smallest steps, trimmed the middle management layers, gave more power to regional head chefs. Each branch was allowed to create menus tied to local identity. I invested in clean supply chain tech so every customer could track ingredient sources right from their phones. I opened our first international location in Osaka, then Amsterdam, then Cape Town. In each city, I made time to meet the farmers who grew the greens, the fishers, the bakers. I wanted to remember their faces, hear their voices, understand that what I was building wasn't just meals, it was a living ecosystem. Alongside that, I launched the Olivia Matthews Foundation, a scholarship program for women of color and underprivileged children with a passion for culinary arts. No GPA requirements, no demand for impressive resumes, just passion and a real story. The first letter I received came from a 16-year-old girl in Louisiana who used to help her mother cook for 3 younger siblings in a home made from old shipping containers. "Miss Olivia," she wrote, "if I could learn how to cook, I'd make meals for our whole block. Everyone's hungry, but nobody even knows how to turn on the gas stove." I cried, reading that line. Not out of sadness, but because I saw my younger self in that tiny Denver kitchen, with nothing but my 2 hands and an old pressure cooker. The global culinary world started to notice. Not because I had once been a Carter daughter-in-law, but because I had embedded the idea of culinary justice into a business model, something corporations had preached for years but never really delivered. Food World magazine called me the quiet innovator. I declined the cover. I only agreed to one brief interview under the condition that half the airtime would focus on the scholarship program and agricultural partnerships in Latin America. One Saturday afternoon, while I was sitting in the backyard of our new Portland headquarters right next to a vegetable garden irrigated by a rainwater recycling system, my assistant brought me a thick envelope. No sender's name. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The cursive was neat, round, every stroke almost mechanical in its precision. I recognized it instantly, Linda's handwriting. "Olivia," she wrote, "I've lost everything. My reputation, my position, and most of all, the pride I had as a mother. But I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I'm writing because I now see that, in the end, I was the one left behind. You weren't the daughter-in-law I wanted, but it turns out you were the only one who could save it all. If one day you're willing to accept an apology, please let this be it, spoken sincerely." I folded the letter. Didn't respond. Didn't post it. Didn't tell anyone. An apology can't erase years of being called an outsider, being pushed out of seats, silenced. But I didn't need revenge anymore. Because I had survived. And I had grown beyond my anger. Around the same time, Ethan sold the house on the Upper East Side. The news was tucked quietly into a real estate column. The buyer was a young entrepreneur from Austin, paid in full, in cash. I didn't pay much attention. But a few days later, I ran into an old acquaintance at a social economics conference in Chicago. "You know," he said, "Ethan teaches weekend cooking classes now at a community center in the Bronx. Doesn't do press anymore." I didn't comment. No one knew, but I had transferred all post-divorce property rights into an independent trust, with a clause that stated, Ethan would never be allowed to rejoin any company that had once belonged to the Carter Holdings system. I didn't do it to get revenge. I did it because I didn't want anyone, especially him, to have the chance to rebuild an old version of power that had once oppressed me, and so many others. I didn't expect Linda to understand. I didn't need Ethan to make amends. I just wanted to spend the rest of my life doing what I once dreamed of, back when I had nothing but a battered stove and a dream too big for my tiny kitchen. And every time I see the eyes of a young girl chopping onions in a class funded by the scholarship, or hear the sound of laughter coming from the test kitchen at our Paris branch, I know. I wasn't reborn to become someone greater. I was reborn to return to myself, and no one can ever take that away from me again. The gala was held at the Rosemont Hotel in Chicago, the same venue where we launched, the first Harvest and Hearth branch outside of Colorado. This time, I wasn't there as a sponsor or a behind-the-scenes coordinator like I used to be. I was the guest of honor. And in a strange moment, even my own heart skipped a beat as my name echoed through the grand ballroom. The most influential woman in America's food industry, Olivia Matthews. I stepped onto the stage in a plain black dress, no sequins, no sparkle. Every spotlight pointed at me, but I kept walking steadily, as if I were crossing the long hallway of nameless meetings, slammed doors, and empty chairs I was once told I didn't deserve to sit in. The applause lasted. I stood at the mic and looked around. Some were familiar. Some I only knew from articles. Some were faces that once quietly stood up and left the table when I entered the room years ago, now looking at me differently. I smiled and began softly. I've been called a chef, a businesswoman, a founder. I was once labeled Ethan Carter's wife in article after article. I was even left off the guest list of a dinner I had designed the menu for. I stood in that lobby, alone, no seat, no name, no greeting. And they thought that was the end. The room fell silent. I looked toward the back row. Through the blinding lights, I saw the tear-filled eyes of Ella, the senior cook in Denver, who taught me how to slice onions when I was 19. But what they didn't understand, I never needed a seat. I only needed a voice to protect those behind the kitchen doors. Single mothers making meals on minimum wage, children walking 5 miles each day just to attend a cooking class. People turned away because they didn't fit this industry's standards. I paused for a moment. The room stayed still, listening. I'm standing here not to celebrate my own victory, but to say this: every person ever pushed out of a dining room can build a new table where everyone has a seat. Applause followed. Not overwhelming, not flashy, but honest enough to make my nose sting. I ended the speech simply, then bowed. No one stood out of politeness. They stood because they understood I hadn't just survived. I had changed the rules of the game. That night, I returned to the new headquarters of Harvest and Hearth in Portland. The building wasn't tall, but its glass walls reflected the Willamette River at night. I went up to the rooftop. No party. No champagne. Just me, a perfectly poured glass of red wine, and silence. I stood by the railing, looking out at the city lights. Rows of low-rise buildings, traffic lights blinking at the same intersections I used to cross after pitch meetings where no one remembered my name. I thought about those nights I came back to my small apartment at 2 in the morning, hands still smelling of sesame oil and fried shallots, clothes soaked with sweat, heart heavy. I'm not there anymore, but I'm still me. I carry no titles, no trophies, only a timeless lesson. If no one offers you a place, create a space where you need no permission to walk in. I raised my glass, not to toast anyone else. Just a light clink against the air as a quiet thank you to myself for walking through everything that once felt impossible. The breeze was soft. The city below glowed like a tapestry woven from 1,000 stories. And among those lights, I knew one of them was mine. What do you think of my story? If one day you were pushed out of the room where you rightfully belonged, would you stay silent and accept it? Or rise and build a space of your own? Is silence always weakness? Or can it sometimes be the preparation for a return no one expects? I share this not to reopen an old wound, but to spark reflection. In every family, every relationship, there will always be empty chairs. But what matters isn't whether you're invited to sit, it's whether you dare to speak up, protect your worth, and carve out your own place. If you've ever felt left behind, underestimated, or like an outsider in your own home, please share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to follow more real, heartfelt stories about family, self-worth, resistance, and forgiveness, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Because every story is a reminder, we are not alone in the journey to reclaim our value. I'll see you in the next one.